My name is Daniel Gilyeat. I was a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. And today I'm going to tell you some of the story that I've gone through. It's not my story, but it's God's story. I grew up a pretty broken and wild teenager. My dad left when I was 8, so there was just absolutely no reins to keep me under control. And the group that I fell in with, the guys that accepted me, were into drugs and alcohol and many other things, and since they accepted us, that's just kind of the way that we ran. I found myself at the age of 17, a high school dropout. I dropped out in the 9th grade. So I went to Montana and lived on an Indian reservation way up in the Rocky Mountains. I grew up in Kansas, so this was completely new to me. But all my friends looked like guys from Dances with Wolves. They had long hair past their belt line, and they just loved running through the mountains every weekend. And these were the guys that I just really clung to. And I got my education and got a trade in heavy equipment, diesel mechanics, and lived in Montana for a year and a half, and it was just like my slice of heaven. I got fairly close to God at the time, but I would say I had fire insurance. I really wasn't running with Him. I was kind of running, I was on the fence, if you will. And so fast forward about 2 years, I'd gotten out of Job Corps. Nobody wanted to hire me without 4 years of experience, so I started doing carpentry and welding and a couple of other things. But I always knew that there was more that I wanted. I wanted to challenge myself. So I decided that something that I always wanted to do was join the United States Marine Corps. So I joined the Marine Corps at the age of 23, and I loved every minute of it. I got out in '99 after my first 4-year tour, and then 9/11 happened shortly after that, and I went right back in. And at that time I was married to a woman who was also a Marine, and we had 3 kids at the time, and she was expecting our 4th child when I got my first call to go to Iraq. Went through that first tour, really successful. Came home a little bit early because my wife at the time was giving birth to our 4th child, so I was home for the birth. And then in 2005 I got called again. My marriage was extremely rocky at the time, so part of the reason I went was to save my marriage. Part of the reason I went was to let my kids know that somebody close to them was going to stand up for their freedoms. And then there was another part of me that wanted to go because I knew that I had skills that would help my other Marines come home safe and alive. So about 3 months before we were punching out to go to Iraq in 2005, I kept having this overwhelming, occurring dream that I was going to be shot in the chest while I was there, that I was going to encounter something that was going to require me not getting excited and bleeding to death or going into shock. And then once we got to Iraq, I still had this reoccurring feeling and these visions and these dreams. Well, July 3rd, 2005, our Humvee, our up-armored Humvee, found a roadside bomb. And right after we drove over the bomb, it knocked me unconscious for a couple seconds, and as I was picking up my chin off of my chest and I was starting to regain my visual, I noticed that there was dust all over the inside of the vehicle and my ears were ringing. So it dawned on me, we just got blown up. So I yelled at every one of my guys to get out of my vehicle. There was 5 guys in my vehicle, 1 in the gun turret behind the 50 cal. I was the vehicle commander. I was a sergeant at the time, and I was in the right front passenger seat, and then my driver and 2 back seat personnel. We hit this bomb. I yelled at all these guys to get out of the truck, and I opened my door and it swung out and it hit dirt. And I thought, man, we're either in a large crater or the whole front of our truck was gone. It was both. We had ran over a double-stacked anti-tank mine. So as I'm looking at the dirt, I can see that my left pant leg is shredded and our vehicle's just completely destroyed. It's sitting on the ground. So my first instinct was to fall out on the ground and try pushing myself away from the truck because I didn't want to compromise my guys. The enemy was notorious for planting another bomb close to the site so that when all your guys ran up to help the wounded inside of the vehicle, they'd detonate a second bomb, killing everybody. And that was one of the first things that went through my mind. So falling out of the truck and trying to get away from the truck without anybody's help was my first initial instinct. Once I landed out on the ground, not realizing how bad my left leg was damaged, but I knew it was tore up from the way my pant leg had looked through the sunlight and the dust after I'd opened my door. Once on the ground, I tried pushing myself away and I couldn't. My right leg was stuck. So I yelled at somebody to help me get my leg unstuck from the vehicle. And my buddy that had been in the 50 caliber gun turret, he had actually been blown out of the top of the truck and landed on top of the truck, and our 50 cal landed about 15 feet behind us. I realized later on that he had taken a video footage of the roadside bomb that was down on the highway, and when he came down inside to put up his camera, that's when we drove forward and ran over this bomb that had been planted in front of us. So if he had been standing up, the 50 cal would have just ripped him in half. But luckily he survived that, and he was the first guy to get down after he regained consciousness to get a tourniquet on my leg. So as I laid there on the ground with him cranking down on this tourniquet, I watched another buddy of mine remove my foot from the truck. Inside of my boot was removed from the truck. And the first voice I heard was God's. He said, "Lay there, be calm, you're not gonna bleed to death." The second voice I heard was all me, because I told myself, man, I'm not a lizard, that's not gonna grow back. And so then all my guys are kind of standing around like deers in headlights. They had this shock look on their face, and they were kind of frozen in time. Well, by then the medic gets up to me and he says, "Hey, you know, I'm gonna work on you." And he gets down on his knees next to my freshly amputated leg, and he starts cranking on another tourniquet. So I'm laying there and my guys are trying to give me some water and some other stuff, and I'm like, "Hey doc, can I get a shot of morphine? This leg is killing me." He goes, "Yeah, not a problem." He goes, "I've already given you a couple shots, but I'll give you another one." So as he leans across my body to give me the shot of morphine into my right thigh, he ends up sticking his elbow in my freshly amputated leg. And I was like, "Doc," I'm like, he'd been bumping my leg the whole time he was working on me, but this in particular one, he'd stuck his elbow without realizing it in my thigh as he leaned across. I was like, "Doc, you bumped my leg again, I'm gonna punch you between the legs." And all my guys started to laugh. And we were real big into hitting every gym on every military base that we came across. That in particular day was leg day. And I looked over at my captain, who was this great big cornbread fed guy from Missouri. I said, "Captain, I don't think I'm gonna make the gym today." It wasn't until about a couple of years ago where I had this out-of-body experience that I didn't remember until just one day, God revealed it to me that on the way to the hospital, I remember sitting up in the helicopter and watching the desert floor go by, houses and villages and this and that. And there was absolutely no way that could have happened. My leg was gone. I was laying flat on my back, and the windows are about 4 feet off of the helicopter floor. And so I knew that that could have never happened, but I remembered this. And I remembered when we got to the hospital that once we landed, I thought to myself, you know, I'm tired, we made it to the hospital, I'm alive, they're gonna save my life. And I went to sleep just as they were getting ready to run me into this tent unit. It was like a MASH unit, if you've ever seen the TV show MASH. And got out of surgery, and I woke up, and the first thing they wanted to do was call my wife back home. And I just broke down in tears, because it was just one of those things where the enemy just flooded me with all these lies. You're going to be half of a man, you're never going to walk again, you're going to be a cripple, you're going to be a burden on your family. Just all of this garbage just flooded my head. And so I ended up calling home, and it was a very emotional time. Had to lay there in the hospital for 3 days because we still had rockets and mortars coming in and sandstorms and everything else. And the doctors could run to the bomb bunkers, but they couldn't take all the wounded with them. So we just had to lay in those hospital beds and hope for the best. Finally, after 3 days, they got me on an airplane and they flew me out of the country, and we landed in Landstuhl, Germany. Then they flew me to Brooke Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. And I was there right at 2 weeks. But again, they were just pumping me full of morphine and Neurontin and methadone and all this other garbage. And I didn't care about myself. As soon as they gave me a wheelchair, I was over visiting other guys and girls that were coming in off the battlefield, wanting to know how they were doing. I didn't care about me, I cared about them. And I realized a little bit later on that I still wanted to serve my country. I still wanted to be a part of something. I still wanted to make sure that the guys and the girls to my left and my right were doing okay. And so it really put things into motion later on when I got out of the Marine Corps to continue to serve, and this is how I was going to do it. I was going to put my situation aside and go and help others that were suffering worse than I was.
I'm Karen Kornacki from Channel 9. I'm going to shoot this for the web. Why are you doing this?
This is for the veterans.
And it really helped me put my situation into perspective. You know, I'm only missing a leg. Some of these guys are missing both legs and an arm. Some of them were going through divorces at the exact same time because their spouse couldn't handle it. And I was like, man, I have nothing to complain about. Well, I finally got out of the hospital a year later, exactly a year later. From the day that my leg got blown off till the day I was walking was 26 days. That's absolutely impossible without God. I found out later on I was supposed to bleed out in 2 minutes. I survived for an hour. They told me later on that I did die twice on the helicopter ride. So I knew that God had intervened in those areas because I shouldn't be here. Well, they finally released me June of the following year, like I said, and by July I was home, and July 3rd, exactly 1 year to the day, I got divorce papers and my wife at the time left. Now, I said in the beginning I was trying to keep my marriage together, and I really believe it was just too much for her to handle, and she ended up leaving, and she took 2 of the kids with her and left me with 2 of the kids. She was trying to do it peacefully, I suppose. And I really became bitter and very angry, but I really wanted to continue to serve. So I was trying to figure out my new trail in life, if you will. And in 2007, ABC Extreme Home Makeover knocked on my door.
Good morning, Gilyeat family. Daniel, Alexis, Victoria, Danny, and Nicholas. Come on out here. Hey, how are you? Hi there.
And they were like, hey, we're considering building a house for you in Kansas. We're doing a 50-state home build, and you know, your name came across our desk, and you know, what do you think about this? And I was like, you know, that's great. You know, I don't even expect a thank you or anything else from my time of service. It was my joy to be able to serve. In fact, I'd tell a lot of people, you know, when you see my service and my sacrifice, when you come up and say thank you for your service, I say you are worth it. Christ was willing to die for you just like I was willing to die for you, even though I didn't know you. And I told ABC, you know, I don't expect nothing, but I would like to upgrade some things for my home. That would be nice for my kids. My kids deserve it more than I do. Well, they bulldozed the house. They built a brand new house, and they tore it down and rebuilt it in 3 days. And you know, they gave us the house on November 10th of 2007, and all the Marines that I'd served with were from my hometown. And they came and helped tear down and rebuild my house. And on the day we got the house, the Marines were lining the streets, and it was overwhelming. I couldn't hardly talk through all of that. But I'd found that God had given me a voice, and I found that there was so many guys and girls that died over in combat or no longer have a voice, and I felt like I survived for a reason, and God has given me a voice to reach out and help veterans, reach out and help the combat that are combat guys and girls that are dealing with PTSD and suicidal thoughts and nightmares, and that's what evolved into our ministry. It's called Y'all Ministries. You are worth it. Christ was willing to die for you just like I was willing to die for you, and whatever valley of darkness we're going through at the time, if it inspires somebody to reach out and get help, if it inspires somebody and says, hey, you know what, if he can do it, I can do it, then it's all been worth it. And the Extreme Home Makeover, it was so wild because it ended up being the first 2-hour episode, and it was the highest #1 rated episode ever. The first time it was aired, over 47 million people watched it, and it even beat the Grammys. Well, from there, it spread out all around the world, and I was getting flooded with all types of emails and letters. And this one in particular letter came across my desk one day, and it was from a woman who was living in New Zealand. And she had said, hey, you know, been there, done that. And basically her story is she'd been ripped in half in a car accident. She had a face-to-face encounter with God. She had bled to death at the scene of the accident. And many miracles transpired. She wrote a book called Cut in Half, How God Mended Me with 23 Miracles. When she woke up in the hospital, she was paralyzed. She had kidney dialysis. She had lost 6 feet of her intestines. She'd lost her colon. And the diagnosis was, you're never going to walk again. You're always going to be paralyzed. You're going to have a kidney dialysis, and you're going to have a colostomy bag. And she said, no, I had a face-to-face encounter with God, and he said he's going to restore me. And so as she's telling me this story, things were clicking with me, things that I experienced that day on the battlefield, and some of my walk after that, about how every day is just such a gift and such a blessing that you take time out to look at the blades of grass and the color of the trees, things that you might not have had that opportunity the following day. You know, every day could be our last. And so you've got to live life to the fullest. But part of what that means is not living for yourself, but living for others. Going in and finding people who are suffering worse than you and changing their life and feeding into them and helping them out and saying, hey, been there, done that. This is how I got through it. Let's get through it together. Or, you know, having a network of people all across the United States so that when there is a veteran suffering, there's a homeless guy, there's whatever it is, we have the resources and the ability to get these people help. Because everybody is valuable. Hearing God's voice really put a lot of questions in my mind. In 2012, after this lady I was talking to from New Zealand who had been ripped in half in a car accident, I actually convinced her to move to the United States. And she actually landed in the country on July 3rd of 2009. And by September 11th, we were married. And on our wedding cake, my mother wrote, on 9/11/01, 2 fell, on 9/11/09, 2 stood tall. And I thought that was a great day for our marriage and for us to kind of start our ministry. And hearing God's voice always stirred something in me, that I know that I heard God's voice, which is something different than I'd been told in the church. So I really started seeking him with everything I was, and I found him. We good there, or we want to keep going?